So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump right in and start with a little bit of an exercise here. And it's going to require you to do three things simultaneously. It's going to ask you to both be observant, listen, and talk all at the same time. But it's going to be really quick. So the first part of this is everybody needs to take themselves off mute. And then once you come off mute, I want you to speak listing 5 things that you see. Once you've said your 5 things, go ahead and put yourself back on mute and begin.
Water bottle.
I see a panel of speakers, my laptop,
Different kinds of pictures,
speakers, keyboard, cell phones,
people,
people.
Lennie's wall,
curtains,
I like
iPhone,
Lennie's color on the wall.
smiling faces,
Clock,
water bottle, bandana, cat.
pictures, headphones.
Awesome. So that just put everybody kind of into the place that we are at, right? So we're a little working on a little bit of presencing here. Right? So this is going to be kind of an experiment, and as it is actually a coaching conversation, I want to introduce some simple guiding principles because it's not one-on-one conversation. It's going to be a global conversation, and there are a lot of voices, as you just heard, and so there's a lot of things to be said. We want to make sure everybody who wants to speak has that opportunity, and in order to do that, I'm going to borrow a technique from our First Nations peoples and how they do a lot of their ceremonies. And that means that how we're going to apply that is when you feel called to speak, you're welcome to speak, but you only get to speak once. That way it gives everybody else the chance to speak. So it's kind of like you go to the bar and you get a ticket for a free beer, right? You only get one ticket. Once that ticket's gone, it's gone. Once you've spoken, once you've been called to speak and you've had your opportunity to speak, right, then you become a silent observer, right? And the listening becomes really important because you're listening for the entire community. So basically, everyone has the opportunity to speak. Not everybody might get to speak. It just depends on how this plays out. Again, I mentioned the experimental part of this is that we're coaching the community as opposed to individual one-on-one coaching. This isn't group coaching. It's not team coaching. I do a lot of that stuff. This is going to be very different, right? So when you speak, I would ask you to be very clear about, are you speaking from your experience as an individual, or are you speaking as a member of the Agile community? Am I making myself clear as mud? I see lots of nodding. Okay, awesome. So coming back to the psychological safety, right? Being that this event is being recorded, and I do want you to show up authentically, right? Is there anything that you need from me in order to have that psychological safety? All right, I'm not seeing, hearing any responses, and I'm seeing some no shaking of heads.
Yeah,
so
just use my name correctly.
Okay, so say it for me.
Linda.
Linda, okay, fantastic. I'm sorry if I misspoke.
No,
earlier.
You haven't, but it's interesting some of the nicknames people come up with.
Ah, okay. Thanks, Linda. So the heading of today was Bring Your Boss to Work Day. This is a topic that comes up a lot in the work I do with Agile coaches. So there's a great tangent. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a leadership coach. I work with executive leaders. I work with leadership teams. I just happen to have over a dozen years of Agile experience behind me. Most of my work, though, does deal with leadership and the complex existential problems, right? The big issues that leaders are having. The other part of my business is I offer professional coaching and coaching supervision specifically for Agile coaches. And so when I've heard this problem over and over again from the Agile community, that's where I hear it. It comes up in almost every client that has come to me for coaching supervision. And so that's the opening of this conversation. In the description, I threw out the challenge for you to bring your boss to this conversation. How many of you did that? Todd, your boss is here?
I did, and he said he had to jump off to a leadership meeting, and he's having some laptop issues. But
Awesome.
I brought him, and I also invited my coworker on our team.
Fantastic.
Just me right now.
All right, Todd, that's great. I thank you for having the courage to do that. So Todd's the only one who actually brought somebody. How many of the rest of you actually invited your boss?
I am my own boss, so there you go. Brought me, myself, and I.
Okay. So there we go. Here is our opening salvo, right? In the Agile community, why is this such a difficult topic to address with our bosses? What's making the conversation about coaching with our bosses so difficult?
It's not a peer relationship, meaning that if chances are very good that you've got a good relationship with your boss, but it's a different kind of dynamic because neither of us are would be talking with our peers at this point. Half the room would be and half the room would not be, which could be kind of interesting. Same reason I don't drink with them very often.
And Linda, where is that difficulty coming from?
There's things I really do prefer to keep my work life separate. It's one of the challenges with Agile. I've had, for better for worse, I have a work persona. But when it comes to managing bosses, there's just some things would rather not deal with them in the room.
Who'd like to add to the story?
I'll add to the story. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of leaders have made the decision that it doesn't pertain to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So just go be Agile. Just go do Agile. Just go do it. That means, I have this saying that it's not important to you until it's important to you. I've had several situations in my career where, there's a lot more than just Agile practices here. There's mindset that's most important, and a lot of these leaders don't understand the difference, and they think that they can just go and tell you to go, do the right things or whatever, but they don't. It doesn't matter if you have leadership. I say it doesn't matter if you have leadership buy-in and support. You need participation and engagement to be successful. And I think that that's one of our struggles with the leaders today. I remember very well, many of you may know him, somebody that very famously said, if you can't come, send no one. I truly believe that. So not every leader is meant to be an Agile leader. And we're making some mistakes, and that's why we're not getting the success that from a personal perspective to be successful.
And as an Agile leader, tell me more about what's creating the difficulty for you to have those conversations with the leaders in the organization.
I start with the Agile mindset, and I am I lead with my head and my heart. I treat people as equals, not as workers. I'm just as much part of the team as the rest of my team members. I never say that anybody works for me, and yet my leaders, and I have to tread lightly here because this is being recorded. My leaders have not been so understanding about what it means to be trusting. There's a few things out there, in my opinion, that are horrible sayings. I don't know if anybody uses them, so I'm sorry if you do, but there's nothing that makes me angrier than they trust but verify. I say trust until, they give you a reason where you can't trust them any longer, but trust them. If you're going to trust. And there's just too many leaders out there that have become leaders without the right skills.
Who else would like to add to the story about the cause of the difficulty before we turn the page?
The occasional poor experience. Would be a good place to start, where, for where trust has been engendered, but it turned out not to have the results that I would have preferred.
So I just want to make an observation here. It's a lot of what's being said is putting the responsibility for these conversations and the difficulty onto the person that we're trying to have the conversation with. So
of course, you're the boss.
let me bring this back to, right, what is our role that's creating the difficulty?
I've already spoken, but let me know if you want me to expand on what
Go
I
ahead.
said.
Go ahead. I'll let you go.
So what causes the difficulty for me is that I don't let things fester. So I'm one that speaks my mind respectfully. But if those individuals are not willing to receive the information to become more agile, then it causes conflict, right? So some people, and I've been in this industry for a long time, and I think that it's important to understand that you have to be respectful, but you have to have the courage to have the conversations. And if you don't, then you really don't have a leg to stand on. But if you do, and it goes super badly, then how do you go to the next level to get them coaching? They're not going to be open to coaching. So
Are you speaking from experience, or are you making an assumption?
Oh no, I'm speaking from very, very strong experience.
Okay. So you've recommended coaching to your leaders and they said they didn't want to go.
Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'm sorry, Catherine, I cut you off there.
Oh, I wanted to I guess follow that. It makes me think of, I guess you're asking like, what is one of the obstacles? And I think one of the most challenging states for me is when someone doesn't participate or avoids conversation. And I like what Carol said about being brave to approach it and assert oneself to try to have a conversation. And then it may or may not go well, but at least you've done your part to try to initiate. But I think the areas where I've had the greatest challenge I've seen in other spaces is struggling to initiate. And there's some bravery needed there.
Hey, Lennie, this is Grant. I'm thinking of a couple different things here, and I think a lot of this conversation really depends upon the maturity of the organization. I'll speak for Catherine and myself because we both work for Aetna, and we have a absolutely firm commitment to business agility from the very highest levels of the organization all the way down. So we never have to overcome any inertia around Agile. Everybody's in, everybody understands it, they get it, and they believe in it. So blessing for us. But I can see that in other companies, maybe smaller ones or those that are going through an Agile transformation, is this issue of leaders who don't really understand what Agile is. They've heard about it, they've read about it. It's the new cool thing that all the cool kids are doing, So they issue this dictum down to the organization that says, okay, everybody, Agile is supposed to be cool, now go do it. But they don't even know what it is. And therefore, they have no metrics around success. And I think it's this disconnect between the leaders who don't really understand Agile and then asking the team to apply the principles that leads to this problem.
Grant, what you're saying is absolutely true. And I want to just redirect the conversation a little bit, because I feel like we're leaning in a direction that, although maybe we end up going there eventually, right? So this conversation isn't necessarily about convincing our bosses to be agile. It's about the difficulty we have as Agilists, right? The Agile community are having about suggesting to our bosses, our superiors, that they might want to engage in coaching themselves.
Yeah, I would come back to the value proposition. I'm going to try to answer the question specifically as you posed it, which is, what is the difficulty that we have? And maybe the difficulty that we have is we can't really articulate clearly what the value proposition is. Maybe we know it in our hearts and in our head, but unless we can explain it to somebody else in a compelling way, we're not going to get that buy-in.
That's a great insight.
Right. And Lennie, when you said, how, what is the issue on, let's say on my side, it was like fear of upsetting things, fear of changing the relationship. What if they are very offended by feedback? What if they don't think your feedback is valuable and their opinion of you changes? So that would be one thing I would say. Fear. I do have confidence, but you never know how things are going to be taken.
Yeah, and I'll chime in there as well. I think it is, perhaps an assumption or so. It's a challenging conversation to basically suggest to someone they have an opportunity to improve. And that coaching could improve them, because I think many people respond to that with, what's wrong with me, what's not good enough, that type of thing. So I think to raise awareness, hey, there's an opportunity for you to improve, that's a challenging discussion to have with anyone, let alone the person that puts food on your table.
So may I challenge you? Right, so
Sure.
Publicly, you okay? So
Go for it.
I get that, right? And so this is as Agilists, this is what we do, right? We're trying to get organizations to improve, which the only way an organization improves are if the individuals improve. Is that not our role?
Absolutely, it is. It's one of the harder parts of our role, I would say.
Okay. Cool. Awesome.
Are we not permitted to go into solutioning at this point?
No,
or
we're
like,
not permitted to go into
okay.
solutioning yet.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. But I am going to move forward, right? So we've got a good foundation of what's going on with it inside of us, right? There's the clarity, there's some fear in there, right? There's trepidation, there's the difficulty of the role itself. So that's our foundation of what we're standing on, right? That's the core of this topic. So I'm going to move forward here and then work my way back. So from where we are, I'm assuming we have a vision or an outcome that we would like to have. So my question then to the community here is, what is the ideal relationship as Agilists we would like to have with our boss or bosses?
Can we talk once per round or just once for the whole time?
It seems like we have a small enough group, Dennis, that we don't need to worry about just one. So I'm going to flex on that rule.
Okay. And
So
I'm in,
I'm just going to give you a little heads up, right? So when 60 people were going to show up, then I was going to stick with that rule, right? With 9 people, we're good.
right. So I'm in professional services. So, this conversation would be more likely to happen with my contact at the client, not with my boss per se. And my contact at the client, we have a relationship with. It's them and myself who set the the challenge to change things. So if now, and I'm kind of making the same point again, now if I give them feedback or give them coaching, it might be well, I thought you and I understood what was going on. And again, I feel myself saying the same thing, that the changing the relationship is the part I would worry about.
So Dennis, go a little bit further with that. What does that changed relationship look like to you?
Well, they may not feel that I am their partner in the agile transformation any longer. They may feel that I am seeing them as part of the problem, or them as being part that needs to change.
And so just for my own edification here, for clarity, right? That's the vision that you would like to create?
No, again, that's the relationship I did not want to change.
Okay. So could you reiterate then the relationship you would like to have?
Yeah, the relationship I would like to have is for my boss, to understand that I always accept or always want feedback, because I am continuously improving, and that they should embrace that also, and that that all feedback is good, even if it's painful in the short term, as long as you learn from it, it's a good thing.
Okay. Who else wants to add to what that vision looks like?
I'll add to it. The vision that I would have, and I strive to have as a leader with my team, is the same one that I want to have with my leader, right? So I have worked an awful lot with people who want me to be, quote unquote, the servant leader, agilist leader, but they're not. They're a command and control. Tell me what to do, when to do it, why to do it, how to do
So
it.
I'm gonna interrupt and not go into the negative. Tell me what you want to have.
I want them to be a servant leader too.
Okay.
That's what I want. I want to
So
feel
that's what
like
you
an
want them
equal.
to be. What is the relationship you want? I'm going to be a stickler on
That's
this.
great.
Answer
No,
that
that's great.
question.
So
Yeah.
what is the relationship? I want a trusting relationship where I can ask them anything.
Okay. So we want a trusting relationship. We want a relationship of equals from
Yeah.
Dennis.
Give and take,
partners.
right? Give and take.
Yeah. Who else has a vision of what they want that relationship to look like?
Lennie, when I first heard this question, I thought of the 5 Scrum values: courage, commitment, focus, respect, openness. Those have been alluded to: humility, servant leadership. So I agree with what we've heard so far, but I'll add one more thing to it, which I've come to appreciate more and more, which is a shared purpose. It's a shared understanding of what the team is doing, and subjugating egos and silos and power to the end consumer. At the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, is deliver software or something, whatever our deliverable is in our individual teams and companies. So that's what I think of. What does a solid relationship look like between me and people in higher titular authority in my company? It's about a shared purpose and shared understanding of what value we're delivering.
Shared purpose, shared outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome.
I was inspired by Dennis saying the opposite of being partners, because I I really think that expertise in learning should be decentralized, and I resist this notion that they're more expert than that there's a positional expertise. Like, so I try to strive for like, we can learn from each other, looking for a thought partner, a supporter, a strategic partner, an ally, and a protector if I need it.
Well said.
I like that term, ally. Morgan Barrett, I think her name is, or maybe I'm saying it backwards. Maybe it's Barrett Morgan, has a great book that talks about allies. So we have allies, shared outcomes, equal partners. This is all great stuff. Are we missing anything about what we want that relationship to look like or feel like?
I would add the psychological safety, and for bringing anything up, for it not to ever be punitive in any way.
I suppose in terms of aspirationally, what that relationship would look like is something that is joyful, right? If that comes from creative expression or achieving together, or even just, having that friend who's giving you sound insights. I think that coming out of that relationship is something that's a positive experience, learning, that's important to me.
Love that. So I'm going to kind of twist this just a little bit, and I'd love to hear from a couple of people that we haven't heard from yet. If we had those things, how would that look to other people? How would we know we had it? How would other people know or know that that's the relationship we have?
I think that you could see that you are making each other better people.
Sorry,
already-
how?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask how, or more about what that looks like.
I'm not sure what that would look like, other than, like, you could see that they support each other. You can see that they have each other's back. You see that they, you might be surprised that, wow, you told your boss that, and they said, well, yeah, but they want the honest truth, and sort of that courage to be able to do that, and modeling that behavior of being able to accept feedback and take that in. That's all I can come up with right now.
How about some other voices?
I think part of it is being able to see both the positive and the negative from both perspectives, right? And acknowledging that respectfully, of course. So, I'm in a good relationship with a couple of colleagues, and we often encourage each other by acknowledging their successes, even when they're not there, right? So acknowledging the skills and the talent that the other people have.
I just funnily enough saw a email come in from a lunch and learn that's coming up that says lead with joy and watch your team fly. And Richard Sheridan is the guest speaker. So if you guys have not heard Richard speak, Highly recommend. He's the most joyful guy I know that leads organizations. So,
So one more question in this line of thinking here. If we had that, if we had that joy, if we had, right, that peer, that trusting, that psychological safety, if we had all those wonderful things, what would be different? What would we have then that we don't have now?
I think you'd have more people that were excited about getting up and going to work every day and getting stuff done. They'd be more engaged in the outcomes and care about being part of it.
Enjoying going to work every day is kind of nice.
That sounds like motivation and community to me.
With that, you'd get a greater willingness to experiment, I think. Try new things.
I think people would be motivated to want to actually do more.
There's also some really worthwhile things to work towards. So let me come back to where we were, right? So our present situation that, right, we've identified that there's some lack of clarity and some fear, right, stopping us from having these truly wonderful things, right? To get up in the morning and want to go to work. So now we've identified a gap. Here's where we are. Here's what we want. So being that those are worthy things to work towards as a community, what are some possible options, some possible things, some possible next steps that we might take to start closing in on that gap?
Modeling behavior that we want to see and sharing impact.
Say more, Sherry.
Well, I recently had a situation where I would meet with somebody individually in leadership, and then 3 hours, and we had agreed upon something, and it was their idea. And then 3 hours later, in a group meeting, they had changed their mind, and I was getting new information, and it happened a couple of times in the same week, same kind of situation. So I spoke with them one-on-one and just said, that, hey, I know that we talk with many people every day. We're human and we forget what we've said to who. But when things change like that, and you and I had a conversation and it's changed, the impact of that, regardless of whether you intend this or not, is it kind of breaks down a little bit of trust. And so they were kind of surprised to have like that kind of conversation, or anybody like presenting something to them like that. But also just letting them know that like nobody's in trouble. But I also want to open this up, that if you ever want to bring something up to me, by all means, like this is a great way that you can bring something up to me that you have a concern about. But I was just simply wanting to share impact of how that might impact not only me, but maybe others.
That's great. That's great modeling of the behavior. So that's the specific I was looking for. Great. What else?
I feel like you're saying, or like we're being led to think of the end goal is really worth it. So what can we do to work on our fears? You know, the gap holding us back, that the end state really is worth it. And sometimes I think, like, not just for myself, but for others, like maybe I'm fine with putting up with something, but if I have this hard conversation, others will benefit, or this person might learn something. So I'll usually more willing to take a risk if it's going to help other people.
Yeah, so I think it was Grant maybe mentioned the 5 Scrum values, right? Earlier, Catherine, you just said take a risk, right? There's that courage, right? That we often ask our teams to have courage, right? And going back to Sherry, right? There's behavior that we can model. This is what courage looks like.
That's
great,
that's
Kathy.
so true, and I think it's important to be willing to deal with the consequences of the decisions you make when you have that courage, right? Because you never know. Your courage could end up in a completely opposite direction than where you thought that courage would have taken you. And so it's really important to weigh the unintended consequences as well as the consequences that you're looking for before you exude that courage to the wrong people. And I think that's that.
If we're weighing the unintended consequences and then we choose not to act, where happened to courage?
Well, that's the problem, right? Like you have to make that decision. Sometimes you can't have that courage if you can't deal with the unintended consequences. If we never think about what could happen because of that, then you might think, oh, well, so much for having courage, right? I've had a lot of courage in my life and I'm very happy with where I am right now. Others might not be so happy if they were in the same position that I was in right now.
So Carol, let's put this into perspective, right? So
Sure.
right, we're making an assumption, right? There may be unintended consequences. How might we test that assumption? What's a step you could take to test the assumption that these unintended consequences could happen?
Are you asking me?
No.
Okay.
I'm asking Carol.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that you can always test the assumption because it takes having the courage and doing it to find out what the outcome is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if that outcome is, retribution or something like that, you have to be willing to deal with that retribution, and that's okay for some people, and some people it's not. So sometimes it might be like rather than having the courage to go down this path, maybe there's a smaller experiment that you can run, or somebody else that you can go to ask for some help in. Do you think this is a good idea, or something
right?
like
now
that?
we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. So it's not always like blind faith or blind courage. Blind courage is maybe not always the most, the smartest thing to do. But having a buddy, having somebody, a confidant that you can talk to about, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? And knowing that person, do you think X or Y or whatever?
So there's a great reset, right? So the question is, what small steps can I take today? And you just called it out, right? I don't need to take this giant leap to get to this outcome, but there are a lot of small steps. Who else has a small step we might be able to take as a community?
I thought, and I don't know if this has already been covered, giving a small amount of coaching or feedback, just as a test to see if that person or group, would even be open to it. How are they gonna react? So instead of just having the confidence, or the example I get, having the fear, try it, see what you get.
What might that look like, Dennis?
Well, I can't. I was trying to think of an example. It's like, instead of, if you feel like, your boss is too much of a, command and control person, you could, say, you've got this person in the group, and, maybe you could listen, they came to me with an idea about this. Maybe you could listen to their idea about this, and just take that and go with it. Instead of coming right out and saying, look, I want to talk to you. You're not listening, you're too much command and control. And because I have seen, and this is a fine hair and I don't want to go down this path, that someone thinks they're giving feedback and it's really controlling. That every time someone doesn't do something the way they thought it should be done, and here, I need to give you some feedback.
Intent versus impact.
Yes.
I think it's important to also lead with seeking to understand. So asking plenty of questions, maybe to just try to understand the perspective first, which I did actually in this situation before I went into the other part. But asking lots of questions, staying curious, making sure you understand where they're coming from.
So I'm going to shift gears on you here. So we're talking about how we deal with bosses. What if we take off that label for a moment, and we look at it from, how do I build a relationship with this person? What shifts when we have that conversation?
Well, typically we connect with things that we have in common. So trying to seek things that you might have in common with them.
I think as well, being vulnerable in terms of sharing your own experience. If there's, an example where I've benefited from coaching, and this can, even be in a supervisor discussion, either in or outside of a performance review, for example, but even just in conversation, to say, I've had this experience, and this is what I was like going in. This is the experience I had. This is what I learned going out of it, and how it's improved me. You're role modeling. You're demonstrating that value.
So what shifted in all of you when I rephrased that question?
I'll go back to what Sherry said, piggyback on that. My favorite book is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. She talked about seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I will supplement that with the next habit, think win-win, and also the concept of the emotional bank account. So Lennie, when we think about a relationship as opposed to a boss-subordinate structure, what does that look like? And it kind of goes back to my earlier comment about shared purpose. It's how can we both benefit from this? We're not adversaries. I think that the switch in the mind is now we're on the same team and not opposite teams.
Who else? What shifted in you when I asked that question that way?
I think it takes the dynamic of some sort of hierarchy out of it and creates more of a dynamic of this is another human just like me. They have this, similar fears that I may have. Things like that.
I mean, it resonated. I feel that way already. Like, always trying to say, what are they trying to accomplish in their goals and how can I support them and partner with them? Like there's something they're trying to do. And if I start with empathy, that'll help me understand the position they're coming from.
I love that, Catherine. Right? And also Sherry, right? Treating them as an individual, as a person, right? As opposed to, as Grant said, right, as a hierarchical structure. I'm going to start relating to people as people. Oh, what's your purpose? What are your wants and desires? What's going on in your family? I'm guessing that most of us that work with teams are having these kind of conversations with our team members. What do we need to do to shift within ourselves in order to start having these conversations with these other people in our organizations?
I think in some situations, that's welcome, but it's not always. I think, Linda, you started out by saying you like to keep your work and your personal life separate.
Yeah,
And
it really does help.
and see, I am the world's biggest extrovert and I want to tell everybody everything. And when I think that, again, we have to seek to understand what level people want to open up, and know about you and your family, or share with them about them and their family, because you can step on some toes if you ask too many questions, and then it can go down a slippery slope as well. So I think, again, seeking to understand the level at which they want to be anything other than just work.
So Carol, I love what you're saying. How might you do that? How might you seek to understand what their level of engagement is?
Me, I just simply ask, because if you don't ask, you don't know. There's no sense in beating around the bush. It's just easier that way for me, and then I know. I think that's learning through experiences, though, right? I mean, I learned once that I probably pried too much, and I didn't ask, so now I know to ask. Or there was a mistaken identity once, and I was at a conference and I hugged somebody, and they were, I'm not much of a hugger. Oops, oops, sorry. It truly was. I truly thought it was somebody else, and so it was nothing to try to be standoffish about. But again, I would never do that unless I thought that they were open to it. So I guess it's just knowing, through experiences, we learn these things, and that's a
trust but
question I would
verify.
just ask.
It's back.
That's a different kind of trust but verify.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say, I feel that in terms of empathizing and partnership and so forth, understanding someone's values really is an important part to that. And so for me, the purpose of some of those conversations isn't necessarily that I actually care, how many dogs you have and how many kids and where they grow. No, what I want to understand actually is what's important to you. So if it's a conversation and you ask, how was your day? And they say, it's listening and paying attention to that response. Are they focused on, well, it's listening. It's listening and observing to understand what they value. And then that's what you can tap into, and less about whether it's a personal or work.
Todd, you're mirroring what NH said in the chat. I get to know them on a human level.
I wasn't looking at chat, but yes, that's right on the same wavelength. Yep.
Yeah. NH, do you want to say more about that?
That would be me. Carol, I was thinking about what you said. So I have a cold, so it's going to be a little difficult for me to speak fluidly. Well, there's two things. So Linda and Carol, when I try to get to know someone, I'll recognize, are they business only? Then maybe they can teach me something from their journey through working, like their work journeys, and then find ways to connect with them on that level. And then if they're more like relational than transactional, I'll look for commonalities and then start bonding through the commonalities. Like, so if I have work challenges, like through my career, my career, I can ask them questions about, well, how did you handle a situation like that? And I think when you can start, I mean, for me, it's been, if I can start pivoting that conversation and that relationship towards like a maybe kind of mentoring, helpful, because people do want to be helpful, then I'm building a relationship in that way. And then I feel like it's not manipulative, but it starts to disarm them. That's been my experience. And I've been able to do that with teammates and people who are like very, very transactional, and asking them questions that I kind of know these things are really important to you. So asking for more information and clarifying questions. Does that answer anything?
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
So I love this whole concept of getting to know them, right? On that level, right? As people.
Well, I have trust issues. So if I can't get to know you, then I can't trust you. So I'm going to figure out a way to get to know you.
Uh-huh. So I want to come back, right? So we have, right, we started with this foundation that was built primarily on fear response. And when we talked about the ideal, right, the what it is that we want, right, what we long for in a relationship with these others, right, all these things that we're talking about now, are they going to get us closer to that? A lot of nodding.
I have a question. If you are really clear on who you are, and you can be, would you say you can, like, that helps you be much more intentional? Like, I'm extremely relational. It's very hard for me to work with someone who's transactional. So I'm going to figure out a way, can I help pivot this so it's more relational? Or can we balance it, find a balance, which I have done with somebody who is extremely transactional, and she didn't realize the impact of being transactional, because her personality is to show up as extremely task oriented and process oriented, and doesn't think about, oh, I have 4 people reporting to me, how do I want to interact with them? But she just didn't have experience because she was young, and she didn't realize that stuff's super important. And so after I had a conversation with her, she was like, oh, and then immediately she started doing team building exercises.
It's amazing when we start working on that level, the conversations that we can have.
It took me 6 months to do that.
And if you didn't do it, how far would you be?
Well, I had to get the courage, and it goes back to what you asked me before, or you said, is that Scrum Masters aren't practicing what they're encouraging their teams to practice. And I had someone I was working with, we were on the same team, and he's like, these things are going to haunt you no matter where you go. So you may as well try these things, do the things that you want to do and see what happens. And so, yeah, I mean, I saw what happened.
And H, where were you when I needed you?
You can always tap me. I'm on LinkedIn.
But in the bravery that you showed benefited a lot of different people.
Could you say that again?
Oh, like you being brave and taking 6 months to do something that seemed worthwhile, like probably had a trickle down effect for other people that were having the same needs.
Definitely. Like I did say to her, because she was my boss and I've never had a boss before. And I said, you might not like me for what I want to share with you and how I see things right now. However, I think in 5 years, you'll be really grateful that we had this conversation.
So,
and she really gave it thought. And so enough that she started digesting and practicing some of the things. So, and then, yeah, it impacted 4 other people. It trickled down and impacted 4 other people. How does that look across the company and who she's in contact with? She might be able to start realizing this person's super transactional. I can show up this way with this person. This person needs a balance. This person needs more of this. And so knowing, like, she just doesn't know that stuff. She doesn't know transactional or relational. She doesn't know what it means. Becoming a manager I think for a lot of managers, they don't look at maybe I should learn something about what it means to be a manager. Like, what do people want when they go to work, and what do they want from a boss? I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they get promoted and these aren't things that they look into doing. Like, I got a promotion, awesome. I got some more money, awesome. But they don't look at the people side of it and what that means.
And coming back to Catherine's point, right, the ripple effect that your interaction with her had to the rest of the people that she associates with was huge. And it goes back to what Sherry was saying about modeling that behavior and to having the courage to do that modeling.
I also want to offer or add from the empathy perspective. I feel like some people really need to be the expert, but also how many of us have experienced imposter syndrome? Like, how hard is it to admit that you need help or don't know something? And that might, so like offering a learning potential, they might really struggle with asking for that.
I was going to say it goes along with showing vulnerability, right? Asking for help, or admitting that things aren't perfect, right? And I think that's something that we're all kind of talking about in different ways, right? To have that trust, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, to show that you can't do it all in yourself, that you're not independent, or that you are dependent on other people, that you need some assistance. So, and that's really what we want, right? If we want a supportive manager, supportive boss, we need to show them how they can support us.
So are you looking at that as a two-way street?
Yeah,
No.
most definitely, right? But, if we want to build trust, we have to show that we can trust others, Carol, like you were talking about, by exposing our vulnerabilities as well. We can't just assume that everybody's going to trust us just because we're there. We have to initiate that, or maybe not initiate it, but we have to express that in some way.
Yeah. Susan, I love that. It comes back to the question we should be asking ourselves is, how are we complicit in creating the situation that we're railing against?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that, right, having that self-reflection allows us then to say, oh, right, here's how I'm contributing to this. What's the small step that I can take? Right? What's the behavior I can model? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the relationship I can build? And I love that. I love what you're saying there.
Thank you.
So Lennie, in the next 10 minutes, how would you like us to spend with
Yeah, so
wrapping things up?
right. So I mean, we covered, right? We looked at where we were, where we want to get to, and we started closing that gap, right? We didn't make a giant step, but we made a lot of little ones. It's agile, right? We're making a bunch of incremental progress towards our common purpose. So here's a moment for you to reflect, and I'd love to hear from each of you individually because we have the time, and we don't have way too many people. But from your experience here today and any discoveries that you've made, what will you take back out to your community, to the larger Agile community, to help forward this learning?
I can't remember who's. Oh, go ahead, Grant.
Lennie is the master of the pregnant pause. He has so much comfort in just the silence that he just outlasts people and outstalls them until they feel compelled to say something. So Lennie, I'll start. I'm going to take away something that my colleague Catherine said. She talked about this concept of a thought partner, and I want to become a better thought partner for Catherine. So with Catherine, that's my takeaway.
So cute. It's nice to have colleagues that work well together, right? And I don't remember who said it, but the concept of starting with empathy, understanding that the person you're working with is another person, no matter what their title. I think that's really important to recognize. And because of their title, they may be looking at the problem you see in a completely different perspective. So it's useful to acknowledge that.
And one thing that I will do is I will try to get to know people on a personal level, not just a professional level, so I can have more of an idea how to treat people.
I think for me, recognizing that in many of the relationships that I have, I will be the one who has perhaps more awareness to our relationship and how it can improve, and to take that responsibility. So that's a bit about meeting them where they are. It is empathizing, it is connecting at a human level, but how to have that caring feedback to improve our partnership. That's what I take away.
So I'm extremely empathic and I focus very much on people and team building. So I think for me, part of my takeaway is to get to understand more the business side and what are the pain points for my boss, and put myself in that person's shoes, and then be able to have a conversation and clarification. Because from a business perspective, I'm not necessarily going to know that. So is there enough clarification and understanding? Are we on the same page?
I feel like I'm going to take away what are the tiny steps you can do, is just talking to someone who is really intimidated to bring something up to the manager in the room. And instead of, here's, do all of these things, I liked how you said, like, painting the vision. Like, think of how wonderful it would be if you had your ideal state, is it worth it? And maybe learning by trying very tiny experiments.
And I think I will be very much more cognizant of the differences in those who are more relational versus transactional, and learn how to work with those who, just because we are considered agile coaches, are not all relational. So NH, thank you for helping me understand that just because we're all in the agile world, we are not all relational, and that recognizing the fact that there is a way to address individuals who are transactional. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Well, I'm curious if for those of you that are Scrum Masters, if you have an understanding that as Scrum Masters, we not only like coach the team, but we are in a position to coach up as well. I don't know if that strikes anybody as a little bit of a reminder. Thanks, Grant. Yeah, just we are true leaders who serve, and part of that is modeling that behavior. And what does that look like?
I've got a couple of situations that are active right now, and I've picked up a couple of ideas here today, and that's been very helpful.
What are some of the ideas, Linda, that are your takeaways?
There's a couple of conversations I've been avoiding, and because I have bills to pay too, but it's but it is time to talk a little bit about a change in process. So I think I'm going to give it a go tomorrow. I'll let you know how it turns out. And is that sign up sheet out there for, are you looking for a job?
That's covered, Linda. You've got this.
Yeah.
So, Nicole, I'm going to call you out here, ask if you want to contribute to the conversation here.
So what I took away was my entire team is basically new, and my boss has been very supportive of basically letting us do our own thing. So the idea, I don't remember who said it, or maybe it was you, Lennie, that what does he need? He's been doing a lot of giving. So
Take your boss to lunch.
Ooh.
can I get the flight too?
Invite him for lunch to your place. Not your place, but
Right.
your location.
So I'm very grateful to be able to serve you here today. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Lennie. Thank you, everyone, for being brave and joining us, and wonderful discussion that all of you have contributed, and go out into the world and share with everyone. This is wonderful.